Welcome everyone to World Energy Week Live 2021. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll be staying with us for the next 3 days. My name is Arthur Hanna, and I will be one of the moderators that will be taking you through a rich agenda over the course of those days. I'm sure, like me, you are looking forward to not just the discussion, but also the insight and, importantly, the networking that will take place during World Energy Week Live. This year, we're hosted by the Ministry of Energy Kazakhstan and Kaz Energy Association, the Kazakhstan member committee of the World Energy Council. And our theme this year for the next 3 days will be Energy for Better Lives. Our live edition is an inspiring mix of online global plenaries and regional deep perspectives on key themes ranging from the rise of digital and the consumer to tipping points and game changers that will transform energy systems by 2020, as well as the role of hydrogen, sustainable finance and meaningful access to energy. Human stories of energy will be at the centre of our interactive exchanges at World Energy Week Live 2021. And I don't know about you, but I am really looking forward to the learning experience that the 3 days gives you. I've been in the industry over 40 years, and yet with all of the change that we see in energy at the moment, this is a unique opportunity at World Energy Week Live to listen, to understand, to network, but also importantly to gain insight. And I know at the end of 3 days, I will learn an awful lot more than I have done as of this moment today. Now we're live here in London, but we're also live in Nur Sultan studio. And its anchor is Shokan Lomulin. Shokan will be anchoring from various points of the week, and we're happy to have him here with us today. He's a professor at the Kazakh British Technical University and a research affiliate at Jesus College, University of Cambridge. Shokan, it's great to have you with us and looking forward to interacting with you over the course of the next 3 days.
Many thanks, Arthur. It's greetings from the snowy capital of Kazakhstan, Nur Sultan, where we all gathered here. And we are very thrilled and honored to host such an essential global event from here, the event which is supported, as you mentioned, by the Ministry of Energy and Kazakh Energy Associations. Thank you.
Thank you, Shokan, and again, looking forward to interacting with you. I liked that notion of the snowy mountain caps that you're looking at, which is slightly different from our view here in London. Now, we're live here in London in Nur Sultan. We're virtual. Many of you will be joining us obviously on a virtual stage. And we're interactive, and obviously interactive is one of the key components that we're hoping to achieve over the course of the next 3 days. All of you will be on the platform, the Hop-In platform that you're basically looking at today. That will be the platform that will be putting forward all of the different sessions, whether they're plenaries or our roundtable sessions that we'll be hosting. But you also have the opportunity on the left-hand side of your screen to look down, to join the expo, see who's there. But importantly, also on the right-hand side, we have the opportunity to interact basically with your fellow members, fellow individuals that are joining us. There were over 2,000 individuals that had registered for World Energy Week Live, and we're hoping you use that opportunity to interact with them, ask questions and dialogue over the course of those 3 days. And finally, obviously, it's a social media event as well, where we're hoping it's a social media event if there's not a DNS problem with Twitter and LinkedIn, as we saw yesterday with Facebook and WhatsApp. But we're encouraging all of you, please, to comment on what you have heard, any insight, any basically questions that you might have as well. And so please look for LinkedIn, look for Twitter, use the hashtag World Energy Week as one word. I'll be tweeting and I'll be putting up commentary on LinkedIn over the course of the next 3 days, and we certainly encourage you to do that as well. So once again, welcome. We're looking forward to a fantastic 3 days. And without any further ado, what I'd love to do now is to hand over to my fellow moderator, Eithne, who is in the United Arab Emirates. And she will be moderating our next discussion, which is called Leadership, the Certainty of Uncertainty. I can't think of a better title to start our 3 days of discussion. Eithne, wonderful to be with you again. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Thanks indeed for that great introduction. And it's great to be here with you, of course, for World Energy Week. This is, as you say, a very, very important week for us. We have so much to cover. We have a great lineup of people from around the world, so tremendous content, and it'll be great to engage, inform, educate, and inspire everybody out there who's with us. So a big thanks to Chokan and indeed to you, Arthur, for getting us started there and getting this session underway. We're going to be looking at the certainty of uncertainty. I absolutely love the title of this because I think the one thing that we can be very sure of as we navigate the energy transition right now is that there's a lot of uncertainty in the world and there's a lot of areas that we really need to be navigating. So once again, a very warm welcome to everybody who is joining us today from London, from all of our great operations from around the world here. We're absolutely thrilled to have everybody here with us. And of course, to all of you, our dear viewers, we do have an operation and a chance to bring in some questions. So please feel free to drop a few questions. I'll do my best to get them in, but we really need to get everything started. And let me introduce you to our panel. We have joining us today in this great session here, we have the Group President and CEO from Sembcorp, Yin Wong is with us. Kim is there, thank you. Lovely to see you here. From TotalEnergies, we have the country chair in Kazakhstan, Ahlem Friga-Noy. So Ahlem, lovely to see you too. We have from New Zealand, the Minister of Energy and Resources. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome her, the Honorary Megan Woods. So please, Megan, there you are, delighted to join you. And we will be joined by Dr. Angela Wilkinson as well. And Angela's with us there, so that's great. We have everybody in place. Angela's in London. So thank you all for being here. As I say, we have an hour, let's get through this and really let's look at that certainty of uncertainty, so to speak. Angela, let me start with you, if I may. And when we look at so much at stake, really, as we ponder the energy transition, I suppose, if you were to maybe start us off and give us some of the main challenges, what do we need to be looking at?
Hi, Eithne, it's great to see you again. So some of the issues, well, we always knew global energy transition was never going to be a single issue or very easy. And what we see today is that energy fundamentals are back at the table, including security. And in effect, we're now challenged to manage global energy transition in a warmer and wobblier world. The COVID crisis has put resilience back onto the agenda and extended it to people and supply chains. We've seen extreme weather effects caused havoc in many countries across the world. And earlier this year, our annual World Energy Issues Monitor highlighted that economic uncertainty has become the most pressing uncertainty in all geographies, closely followed by a new context of affordability and social justice. So energy has become as important as climate, and the recent energy shocks show us that things aren't as steady and stable as we would like them. And the challenge is to manage balanced transition. We've got to manage security, equity and affordability, and environmental sustainability hand in hand. And we mustn't forget that as we scale the renewable energy transition, we have to think about the ecological impacts of the mining impacts of the clean green technologies. So a whole spectrum of different challenges, and very important that we connect them and manage balanced transition.
Indeed, and we have to collect all the people and collect and connect all of the people who are involved in this energy transition, and that's producers, consumers, and governments also. So Megan, it segues nicely into you when we look at, what's happening. We look back on the last 2 years and we look at, the impact of the pandemic. And, yes, emissions were reduced, but sadly economic activity was reduced as well. How can we actually keep both going together and keep economic activity out there and indeed make sure that we, save the planet at the same time?
I think that's a really good question, and I love the theme of this conference, the uncertainty and certainties, and I think in leadership, because I think one of the things that people always look for from leaders is certainty, and I think what we've just seen sketched out there, that's almost impossible. But I think if I'm looking for bright spots, I think that what we are seeing is a number of countries around the world that are putting the transition to clean and decarbonisation at the centre of their COVID economic recovery plans. And that we can see that we can get some double duty out of what we have to do around economic stimulus. That's what we've done in New Zealand, that we've looked to address some of the fundamentals that we're facing, that first one being security. When we look to meeting a goal of 100% renewable electricity in New Zealand, dry year storage, because we rely so heavily on hydro, is so important. So one of the stimulus pieces that we've put into the economy is an investigation into a pumped hydro scheme that can provide us with that more certainty, and also some money into new technologies like hydrogen. So I think that we can actually take the opportunities that we see governments spending more money on big projects than we've seen in many decades right around the world. And I think that's how we can actually put together the contexts that we're facing, the dual one of coming out of a global pandemic, but going into Glasgow and looking at what we have to do across the globe to cut emissions.
Yes, and indeed we'll talk a little bit about investment, because that's absolutely essential and something that needs to be looked at for keeping the lights on now and making sure that we have them on in the future as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. Ahlem, if I may come to you, we look at a company like TotalEnergies, previously Total, a very established international energy company. And when we look at, the work, that you're doing in Kazakhstan, but look even beyond that, what do you see the changing role of the modern energy producer?
Thank you, Eithne, and thank you for inviting us to participate to this important panel. I think, as you said, it's a very, very interesting topic, and us at TotalEnergies, we see the certainty of this dual challenge that we need to address. On one side, the higher demand for energy, and on the other side, the less emissions, with a strong confidence that there are opportunities. The Paris Agreement has changed a lot of things for everyone because there's been an enormous increase in awareness, and COVID has even strengthened this awareness, not just among the business, but also in the broader society. Young people in particular have really become sensitized to the issue, and they're holding our generation to account. So they believe we're not moving fast enough. That has lent a sense of urgency, although we know that it's a long-term project. So we know that the urgency is there, but at the same time, we're not going to change the energy system overnight. It's a complex process that needs a robust transition. If you allow me, Eithne, maybe a few figures which I think are important. The demand for energy will continue to grow. At the same time, the world population will continue to grow. We will reach 10 billion people in the planet by 2050, essentially driven by the emerging countries. The growing of the population and the improvement of the living standards will increase the energy demand. The world GDP and the energy demand have grown over the last 50 years, more or less in sync with the population growth. And at the same time, the carbon emissions linked to the energy has gone from something like 15 gigatons in the 70s to today 33 gigatons in 2019. So of course we cannot continue like that. Our societies must find a way to reconcile the population growth and prosperity with a massive reduction in CO2 emissions. The challenge that will be to reconcile the growing energy demand with the decarbonization and the broader sustainable development goals. And this is our shared sustainability challenge. On one side, we have to ensure a reliable, affordable, accessible energy supply for a growing world population. And on the other side, we have to protect the planet and its inhabitants from the adverse effect of the greenhouse gas emissions and their impact on climate change. So therefore, we should all act, and that's what we think at TotalEnergies, on GHG gas reduction and on the decarbonization of the energy if we set to ourselves an ambition to address climate challenges. This is the new normal for all of us, for the entire industry, for the policymakers, as you mentioned, Eithne, at the beginning of your address, and for the future of our planet. I'll leave it here, and of course I'll be happy to give more details on as of how TotalEnergies look at this challenge ahead and how we believe we could meet them, overcome them with a very strong and robust strategy.
Indeed, yes, and Ahlem, as you said as well, too, this is about a journey. You know, it's a transition. It's not happening overnight. It's the journey to decarbonization, and still a lot that everybody can do. I think that's part and parcel of the big message here. Kim, if I can ask you maybe to look at this from an Asian perspective. And I'm reading a book at the minute that's called The Future is Asian. And it's just absolutely fascinating, and it looks at geopolitics, but it also looks at energy impacts there. Give us a little bit of an overview in terms of, you know, how things are looking in Asia right now and what needs to be done.
Thank you, Eithne, and thank you to World Energy Council for this opportunity. Sembcorp is based in Singapore, right? From our vantage point, we operate in India, China, Southeast Asia, including the UK, Middle East. So we do see that Asia, and consistent with what was mentioned by the other panelists, is moving in the direction of becoming more sustainable. And in fact, I believe that the momentum is really gaining, all right? Because in the early stages, 10 years ago, when I attend events like this, right, especially if it was a regional grouping, and when I talk sustainability with my counterparts, I am usually the odd one out, right? But these days, all my counterparts in Asia, the CEOs of other energy companies, they are all moving in the direction of transiting their portfolio. So Sembcorp, for instance, you know, we have 13,000 megawatts of power generation facilities, of which only 3,300 are renewables, and about 10,000 is conventional. But we are wanting to, we are committed to have at least 10,000 megawatts of renewables by the end of 2025. All right. So the momentum is gaining. The rest of the countries, from the government perspective, they are also making commitments. Consistent with their climate commitments. The energy side, they are talking about, for instance, China, India, and Southeast Asia, they're talking about doubling by 2025 the installed capacity from 650 gigawatts to 13,000 gigawatts. Right, so that's doubling the capacity from today. So this is the momentum that has started in Europe and North America is really gaining in Asia, right? Of course, I look at Megan Woods, the other panelists here, and New Zealand is, of course, at the forefront of the environmental movement, and they are very well endowed with some of these resources. But you come back to Singapore, where I sit. Singapore is a city with no resources, but I think we have to move in that direction. And what are the resources that we need to tap? So, for instance, you know, we max out the solar that we can get, but that's not going to be enough. Some of the technologies that we'll be looking forward to would include, in the nearer term, you know, interconnections, so that we can tap the resources in neighboring places. In the longer run, it will be something like hydrogen. All right. So I think in a nutshell, Asia is gaining momentum. I'm actually more optimistic than less, even though, you know, it's a very diverse region with in a mixed bag. right? So we have still got some countries building coal plants, but generally we are heading in the right direction.
Yes, indeed. I think that's the hope, and we have to have that hope for the future because there's a lot to do. Angela, let me come back to you. And in one of the little promos in the beginning, you know, they talked about decarbonized, digitalized, decentralized. And I know you're a big fan of technology, but it's not the end all of everything. Where is that more holistic approach, I suppose, that we all have to take on board?
Well, when people talk about global energy transition and they pick up the investment question, they tend to talk about investment in technologies. 5 different sets of technologies: the renewable energy generation, the electric vehicle mobility revolution, the battery technology, the hydrogen and the carbon capture and storage type technologies. But what's really important is if we really want to move from transition to transformation at speed and in the same direction, we have to think about a different approach of how to get more people involved. We call this the Humanizing Energy imperative. When we talk about the we mean all of us. And societies currently are not prepared for energy transition, and there are real choices to be made. The best widget doesn't win. Cost effectiveness and scale do. And to do that, you've got to get the pull of people. So the next big thing is thousands of smaller steps of cities, communities, citizens, voters getting involved in energy transition action. And to do that, we're going to have a step change in literacy, and we at the World Energy Council are going to support a humanizing energy imperative in moving global energy transition forward.
And let me stay with you for a moment, because when you started your mission, so to speak, and talked about humanizing energy, there might have been a few people who perhaps said, oh, yeah, right. But you must be so encouraged that in a way, this now has shifted for everybody's agenda. So well done. But, you know, how encouraged are you that people are coming on board?
Well, I think we see a lot more talk about the role of customer-centric energy futures. We hear a lot more about the need to help people understand the choices they're making, the need to get to grips not just with the opportunities, but also the full costs. And how do we avoid airbrushing whole regions like Africa? Or how do we avoid stranding communities? I can remember the transition in Europe from coal to gas, and that left a lot of communities in disarray. This global energy transition is challenging because we need more sustainable energy. We need to achieve climate neutrality, but we have to do it in a way which generates social justice. The challenge is to recover from crisis, repair the planet, renew our societies, and do it in a way which is resilient to future shocks. And we can't do that by just working on copping in and cop down. We have to engage societies in avoiding the risk of what I would call copping out.
Indeed, we'll talk a little bit more about the big COP later on too, but so much there. Thank you so much. Megan, come back to you. Now, you talked a little bit about what the government is doing. And again, government action and targeted government intervention, absolutely essential. But again, many other countries around the world may look at what you're doing in New Zealand and say, you know, you're an island, you're a contained, smaller country perhaps, and maybe this is more difficult around the world. What lessons can other countries learn from what you're doing right now?
So New Zealand is incredibly fortunate in the renewable resources, and Kim mentioned that we're endowed with. Not only do we have hydropower, we also have geothermal power, and we really haven't tapped solar. Wind is a big component in New Zealand's energy sector. We are an island, but being an island means we're also one of the few countries in the world that can't have interconnectivity with other countries to cover dry year risk or to give us security of supply. So we're very aware of that. We've got to produce everything that we use here in terms of our own energy needs. New Zealand is at about 85% renewable electricity, but not energy. We still have, if we look at TotalEnergies, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of industrial and process heat, transport. So there is a lot of work. But I think picking up on the points that Angela was just making, that this does have to be a transition that involves technology. We do need to look at the tools that are there. In New Zealand, one of our large energy distribution companies has just partnered with Development X, the Alphabet subsidiary, formerly Google X, to be one of the cities around the world doing a trial in terms of digital management of the energy system. So we have to embrace technology, but we also have to embrace people in this transition. So the New Zealand government in 2018, we made a decision that we were ending the issuing of new exploration permits for oil and gas offshore. And in the period of time since then, we've been involved in a just transitions approach with the communities that are most affected by that, because the comments that we've had here are absolutely right, that we cannot have people falling off the edge of the cliff. Our existing permits will take us through in that industry 10, 20, 30, 40 years with those existing permits running, but we need to be thinking about the reskilling that needs to happen for those workforces and the skills training we have to put in place for the new energy systems that are coming for us, so that we are showing people hope for their futures, that there is a strong future for them. And I think bringing together the COVID and the decarbonisation story is that for governments, jobs and job creation have to be at the centre of both of those things. And that is where a lot of the opportunities sit.
Now, Ahlem, when we look back on your career and what you're doing at the moment, you've worked in many areas around the world, many areas of unrest and uncertainty. And, now in Kazakhstan, an emerging market, a lot going on there. How do you believe energy plays a role when it comes to the lives of the people and making sure that they get through any type of uncertainty, conflict, and indeed in an emerging market, how important is energy?
Yeah, thank you, Eithne. Let me just restate that TotalEnergies has embarked into a net zero ambition by 2050 worldwide, together with the society. Today, 80% of the world energy supplies still relies on GHG emitting fossil fuel resources. It's a dependence that is not sustainable in the long term, and that is why we need to increase the share of other sources of energy. I'm particularly happy that Angela has focused and highlighted the need to be sustainable, because we as TotalEnergies, we have fully integrated the sustainable development goals into our strategy. Indeed, we have embarked in a major transformation of our company with an ambition to become not only a major multi-energy company, but also a world-class player in the energy transition. We fully support and we advocate for decarbonization of the industry, and we incorporated that in our strategy, as well as climate, energy transition, transformation, and sustainability. As a matter of fact, we have reduced the carbon intensity of the energy product that we sell to our customers by 8%, excluding COVID, in 2020, relative to 2025. And you know that worldwide, we have the ambition to reduce by 40% our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030. As at the same time, we have the ambition to reduce or to lower the scope 3 emissions worldwide compared to 2015 by 2030, and as well to reduce the carbon intensity of our energy products over the same period of time by at least 20%. Our energy mix is shifting significantly towards new, renewable and sustainable energies. We believe that gas is a key enabler on the energy transition in power and in the industry, particularly in light of the fact that we all know that oil plateau decline after 2030. We want to develop greener liquids and gases. At the same time, we work on hydrogen, which will see an increase penetration in the industry and in transportation as well. And finally, we believe that there will be a radical electrification with storage playing a key role, and carbon sinks will also be part of this new normal. Altogether, this strategy will contribute to the net zero journey. So, of course, we put our investment in line with this strategy. So we expand significantly our investment into this strategy on sustainable energies portfolio, while we will continue to excel in low GHG emissions oil and gas project. Why? Because this is where the necessary cash to invest in the development of other sources of energy will be found.
Sure, I want to talk about investment in just a minute, so if I can leave it there, because I really do want to look at investment. I think it's something really, really important for all of us. Kim, if I can come to you and you look at, you have operations, you say UK, Middle East, India, China, Southeast Asia. When we look at attitudes to carbon emissions, they're not all created equally. And so how do you as a company move in one direction when you have so many different governments, so many different regulations, policies to deal with? Are you finding that actually everybody is coming on board in this transition?
Thank you, Eithne. No one is going to say these days that carbon is not important. All right. So as you rightly pointed out, it is to what degree, and at the different stages of the development, different countries, and they would feel they have a right to certain emissions, right? So we hear that in the debate between the developed and developing countries. But as a company operating in these markets, what we think we can play a very constructive role is that we would be, by producing solutions that are sustainable and at the same time competitively priced, that would encourage and support the direction moving into more sustainable solutions versus the less ones, right? I also wanting to make this point, which echoes what Angela and Megan said just now, is very important about the human part of it. So as the governments play the major role in making sure that nobody is left behind in this transition, I think companies like us, between TotalEnergies, Sembcorp, companies that operate in multiple markets, we can also contribute to that process by indicating, because we are good at allocating resources, right, efficiently. So by indicating which are the right places to invest, which are the right places to train, which are the right skills to acquire, how to allocate resources efficiently and effectively, I think that is where a public-private partnership can help on the transition journey, but at the same time, mitigate the risk of leaving people behind.
Angela, if I can, start you off perhaps on the investment question. I think it's a vital one for everybody in the industry. The regulation has to be there, the policy has to be in place. People need to know where to invest, need to know we've had so many discussions in terms of what will be the fuel of the future. So when we look at investment, what does everybody really need to be taking into consideration from all sides? And particularly, what are you looking at? Where would you like to see more investment?
Well, usually that question is around where to put your money in terms of technology bets or in terms of reskilling and workforce diversification. But I'd like to upframe it a little bit, Eithne, if I might, in terms of what is the leadership of this challenge about what we're investing in? And I'm going to come back to a very humanizing energy way of saying it. We're not investing in fixing the energy machine so that we can have more concentrated wealth extraction. Energy transition is also happening at a time of transition of wider economy and wider society. And this is a transformation to clean, sustainable and just energy societies that are trying to regenerate the health of connections between people and planet and between people and other people. So investment for me is investing in this potential for more people, cities, communities to get involved in mobilising what I would call the new middle ground of moving the needle on global energy transition. That's the investment that we really need, mobilising action. That's what's being demanded by youth. They talk about urgency. So there's going to be a broad suite of technologies. There's going to be the need to invest in skills and reskilling, and there's going to be a need for a shift in policy approach from linear and incremental policy to much more transformational and generative policy. So let me leave those as some of the areas for investment.
And Megan, I think that brings me to you. So no more linear policy. It has to be transformation. The role of policy is absolutely essential, because that also helps, the producers. And I find in many discussions tremendous frustration among the producers of energy, because they're ready to move to meet demand, but sometimes they're not sure where that demand is going to come from. And again, how important is it that, in government, that you're all so well aligned with the market, I suppose, with the market, with the producers, with the people. Have you changed, do you think? And is this energy debate changing how you deal with an issue?
It is, and it comes back, I think, to the certainty and uncertainty in leadership, because I think that very much what we're hearing as a government is that investors, these are long-run investments we're asking people to make. They need certainty that it's not going to be subject to the vagaries of the political cycle as well, of what comes in and out. So New Zealand has followed very much the UK model and has ensured multi-partisan agreement around climate legislation that has us doing climate budgets. And we're in the middle of finalising our first lot of emission reduction plans, so that people very much can see what the long run over that will be, and to give that certainty. I think also one of the things in terms of certainty, and certainly I've found as a Minister of Energy, that we absolutely have to do this in a connected, joined up global way. That this isn't something that no one country can solve alone. And I know that that in terms of, if we're looking at some of the new technologies like hydrogen, we've signed a memorandum of cooperation with Singapore. We've signed a memorandum of cooperation with Japan. We're working with the Koreans in our own area in the Asia Pacific region, and I think this is going to be absolutely critical. But I also agree with Angela that the 21st century and the way that nations and communities will view energy systems won't be broadly in GDP or the traditional way the 20th century maybe looked at the industry. And we see energy very much as part of our living standards framework that we have in New Zealand. So when we produce budgets, we don't just talk about the economic outcomes. We have domains that cover the social well-beings as well, and energy is part of that mix, whether it's as simple as someone being able to keep themselves warm in their own home, or our businesses being able to thrive by having access to affordable energy to drive that industry.
And indeed, it is about affordability. It's about affordability, reliability, sustainability. And Ahlem, I hear your CEO use these words very often in terms of what you do as a company. And indeed, when you think about, I suppose, your duty, we look at the shift from a big global energy player like Total, really, and putting sustainability now at the very heart of everything they do. Give us a feel for maybe some of the areas where actually you put that investment in and you're moving in a different direction to make a real difference.
Thank you, Eithne. I think, as I said, we've shifted in terms of energy mix, and just to give you a sense of what it means to materially, our ambition is to have 100 gigawatt of gross installed capacity by 2030, and to do that, we are going to massively invest into the development of these new energies. When I say massively, what we aim at between in the period of 2022 to 2025 is to have an investment program between $13 to $15 billion, and we will allocate 50% of this investment to growing of our activities and 50% to maintaining the base of our activities. 50% of the growth investment will be dedicated to the development of new energies, mainly renewable and electricity, to achieve this ambition of 100 gigawatt of installed capacity by 2030. And the other 50% will be dedicated to the development of natural gas, LNG, essentially LNG projects, because again, we believe that gas will be a major enabler towards energy transition. And Kazakhstan is no exception to that.
And indeed, yes, gas, I think, has been used as a transition fuel in many areas. But again, some people keeping it on board as a destination. Let me come back to you, Angela, for a minute. We're getting some questions from our audience, which is wonderful. And we have a question in right now from Mongolia, from Jamba. So Jamba, thank you for this question here. And you asked what's needed from various suppliers in the energy sector. And it doesn't matter who these suppliers are, be they coal suppliers, oil and gas, renewables. What's needed to resolve the current global crisis of supply and high prices that we see now? And what needs to be done? And I mean, what needs to be done for the future? Angela.
Well, it might seem a strange place to start, but I would start with how our energy use is changing and shifting, and what does that mean for supply-centric choices? Far too often we focus on what is the issue with supply, and we forget to think that actually energy transition is about providing more useful, more affordable, more accessible, climate neutral and equitable energy to connected and diverse energy societies. So we can't solve the problem by just looking at the supply side. We've got to shift our mindset to the new demand-centric, customer-centric energy future and look at mobile energy uses. And as our previous speakers have said, that's going to require a portfolio, increasing portfolio of supply mix choices. Renewables need other energy friends if we are going to get to scale in time to achieve climate neutrality. So for me, the answer to that question is, what do you see when you start looking from the demand side at the implications for supply? Then let's resolve the supply uncertainties.
And indeed, we probably look too often from the supply side. Kim, definitely I'll bring you in on this one. When we look at you as a power provider, and I suppose look at us as consumers, and we take it for granted. We want to put the lights on, we expect it to be there, we expect the air conditioning in the summer, we expect the heat in the winter. I mean, we really do take it for granted. But where do you see your responsibility as a producer of power?
Angela spoke about the demand side, and as a producer of power, we are obviously on the supply side. So it's very natural to say, hey, look, we would try to supply greener electrons rather than the brown electrons, right? So that is obvious. So we heard that many major companies, multinationals like TotalEnergies, were talking about wanting to transit their portfolio. Likewise, Sembcorp is wanting to transit our portfolio from brown to green. All right. That there is also the element of the demand side, as Angela pointed out. We as we supply to our consumers, we can also help shape their behavior, right? And we can also educate them onto the difference between the brown and green electrons. On the supply side, coming back, one important area which I think in the near term it can be accessible and in helpful of bridging this gap that we've been talking about in terms of cost, in terms of reliability, in terms of sustainability, is actually more global or at least regional cooperation in terms of matching demand and supply. Right? Let me explain a little bit more. The world, the globe is not even. There are parts of the world where there are plenty of resources. There are parts of the world that very short resources but plenty of demand. So how to match this? And today technology has given the answer. We are able to go long distance using, let's say, DC and high voltage technology, go long distance, 1,000 kilometers with less than 5% of losses. So if we are able to match demand and supply between regions, such that then some of these issues, some of these gaps are being matched, then the demand center can actually get cheap, reliable, green energy through such means, right? So I see that part of the role of a producer, energy producer like us, in linking, this demand centers and the supply centers. Because if I'm trying to, I just to elaborate that a little bit further, a solar farm in the UAE or in Kazakhstan, if it is of enough scale, you can produce electricity today at less than 2 cents per kilowatt hours, right? And we saw that happening in the UAE at Eithne where you are. But if I were to put rooftop solar in a city like Singapore, because of the lack of scale and because of all that infrastructure I have to put, the cost of the infrastructure it's actually more so than the cost of the panels. The cost of electricity is some 10 cents per kilowatt hours, right? So, but if there is an interconnect between a neighboring country where they have got scale solar production, then between the 2 cents and the 10 cents of electricity, you can make a very big difference. So I hope I shed some light on how I see and how a producer like ourselves see addressing and helping to bridge that gap.
And indeed, it's very clear the costs are coming down. I can imagine in Singapore, it's a very complicated infrastructure project to roll it out. But indeed, it's happening. And I think that's what we have to be, also very optimistic with. Megan, I'm going to come back to you because we have a question. And I think I want Angela to be thinking about this one as well. We have a lot of audience out there. Thank you so much. Some of these questions, ones that I might ask. So I'm glad you're asking them. This is from Denmark, from Britt in Denmark. What's the balance between government and corporate leadership? What's the balance that's needed to tackle the energy transition readiness? And who else needs to be involved? Megan.
I think it's an excellent question. Just as I was saying that this has to be globally interconnected within countries, this has to be interconnected between business, between governments, but also communities, going back to Angela's point around this needing to be people-centric as well. In New Zealand, and it will be the same in many parts of the world, another group that we have to make sure that are part of this sector is that we are bringing in our Indigenous people, the Māori people in New Zealand, that they're part of the transition. Many of the resources are on land that is owned by iwi, as we call the tribes within Māoridom, but also the commercial opportunities that sit there for many of our iwi structures that want to take part in that. So government has to be setting a regulatory framework in concert with industry that they work together on. It also has to be providing leadership, making sure that it's working on what the strategy is alongside all parts of our community. And we also have to bring our environmental movements into this conversation as well. I think that's absolutely critical. And I think we are seeing some changed in different conversations. If I think about the conversation we're having around looking at a new pumped hydro storage facility in New Zealand, that actually we're having a really mature conversation with the environmental movement that only a decade might have just gone straight to thinking about the ecological consequences of building a dam, are now thinking, what does this mean for decarbonisation? And how do we do this in a way? So I think it's about the role of government actually bringing quite disparate groups, seemingly disparate groups, but actually want similar outcomes. And that is that we've got clear pathways to decarbonisation.
And again, I think we have to break down that us and them. But again, at the end of the day, it really is about what good is this going to do for the people? And when we look at similar outcomes, I guess we have to look at that too. Angela, come in on this one here in terms of who needs to be involved. And also, just as Megan said there too, we need more cooperation on a regional, on a global scale. But is that actually practical? Can that happen given just the diversity in the world?
Well, it's going to have to happen. I remember the Johannesburg Earth Summit in 1992, and we came away from that summit inspired by a vision of sustainable development that would be achieved through a new model of public and private partnership. And what we've seen since 1992 is there's been great strides between governments and businesses talking about energy systems developments across the world. But what we're seeing now is that there's a missing P in the public-private partnership, and that's people. People want a seat at the table. They want to talk about a clean, affordable, reliable and equitable energy transition. And as Megan pointed out, in New Zealand that means giving a voice for Indigenous at the table. In many other places it's about communities, citizens and voters needing to understand what are the real choices they're facing. They don't want governments and businesses to give them their visions of the future. They want to be empowered and enabled to achieve their better energy futures for themselves. They want a seat at the table. So government and corporations need to be joined by societies, all levels of societies. And this again goes back to our humanizing energy approach and imperative. You have to involve more people, diverse communities, give them a seat at the table. And let's face it, we live in a world now where we can connect easily through digital across the world. There's no reason why we can't have a new cooperative imperative, but we have to be mindful also that digital is a double-edged sword. We are seeing also social justice movements about who owns data around energy. So a new twist on public, private and people partnerships in energy transition.
And I think everybody would agree with that. And again, I think we see the changing narrative coming from the producers in traditional hydrocarbons as well. But at the same time, and Ahlem, please come in here, you know, we have to keep the lights on today. We have to keep the lights on today in terms of making sure we get to the transition of tomorrow. Green is definitely our destination, I believe, for everybody. So how do we make sure that we can do both? And also taking into account, there's a lot of people in this world that have no access to energy, be it blue, gray, yellow, or green, it doesn't matter. They'd be very grateful to have any color right now. So how do we actually make sure that we can stay on the two tiers?
Sorry, Eithne, you were cut for
the technology that does wonders for us and lets us down every now and then. I'm just when it comes to the fact that we, you know, we need to keep the lights on today, but we also need to gear up for tomorrow. And as an energy producer, you know, I'm sure it is about, you know, making fuels cleaner and doing what you're doing better, but also doing it. But just give us a feel for what you need to do. And then we're going to start wrapping this up. So I'll have everybody begin to think where's next.
Thank you for that. And if you allow me 2 seconds on what Angelo has just mentioned, because I think it's absolutely key. And I want to give the example of what is happening here in Kazakhstan and how the authorities in this country have opened up to call industry, and not only industry, at the table to discuss the energy low carbon strategy that they are developing right now, and to provide inputs into this strategy. I totally agree with Angela's views that that is also needs to include the civil society, the population, the communities. And at the end of the day, what we are looking at is the prosperity of the communities overall. So this is for us very important, and I must say that we are proud to be able to contribute to that in Kazakhstan. Coming to your question, Eithne, I think, well, there are a couple of there is a diversity of different technologies that are used and that are going to be developed tomorrow. The obvious ones are the solar, the renewable, the solar and the wind technologies that are being applied already, and as you know, they are keeping improving as we work. So the importance we put into research and development on those energies and technologies are key. The same goes for hydrogen, and we talked today about green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and I can understand that this is not easy to understand for everybody. But what we are trying to do here is to be a pioneer in the mass production of clean hydrogen. So we are kickstarting a clean hydrogen to cover our refining demand. We will develop mass production of low-cost carbon-free hydrogen. So looking at blue from a competitive gas, looking at green in areas with low-cost renewable electricity, and of course, as already mentioned, in the R&D with hydrogen ammonia fuel for transportation carrier. And this is going to be our new normal, as I was mentioning. The other technology that we want to do and we are working on is the development of what we call biomass. This is something, again, that needs to be scaled up. And in Europe, we want to scale it up by 1.3 terawatt by by 2025. And this is another technology that is going to be developed, particularly in Europe and in the US. So, and notwithstanding all the offset project, starting with the carbon sinks, which are absolutely key if we want to contribute and to make tangible progress when it comes to a net zero journey. So a full range of diversity of technologies. Today, some of them are more developed than others, but with no doubt, all of them will be part of our future.
And indeed, it's a very dynamic time. It's a very ambitious time for all of the energy companies, but again, a very exciting time in terms of making sure they're part of the solution. Kim, we just need to be wrapping up this, but very quickly, I know part of that solution hopefully will be better batteries that are out there, and indeed a business that you're looking at, Kim, as well. So how important and what contribution will that make to getting us to a greener future?
Well, I will give you an example here.
No, I'm sorry for Kim. Sorry. Kim, thank you, Ahlem. Thank you. We have to wrap it up. Kim, my dear.
I'm actually quite keen to hear from Ahlem as well.
I know, we all are. It's a timing issue.
Yes. Just quickly, given the time, the Sembcorp operates one of the largest fleets of battery storage facilities in the UK. And UK today, almost half, about 45% of their energy mix is actually from renewables. So renewables, as we all know, is intermittent, right? So battery has become a very important facility in the UK system to help the grid manage the intermittency. So we're also seeing increasingly, Asia asking for batteries. For instance, if you bid for a project in China today, for 100 megawatts, they'll be asking for 15 megawatts of batteries to go along with it. So as Asia, as more and more energy system transit to increasingly proportion of renewables, batteries will play a very big role. So I'm very encouraged that we are very lucky because we have a fleet of batteries in the UK, and that has given us the opportunity to apply that learning into our home countries, our home territories in Asia. So my theory is that in the near term, immediately renewables are no-brainer, no regrets move. That's the certainty within the uncertainty. In the 5 years time, batteries will become commercially attractive, if not just viable. In the long term, by 2030, it will be hydrogen. So that's sort of the journey that we will have to traverse as we think about the certainty among the uncertainty. Thanks.
And indeed it is companies like you that need to be moving on this. Megan, quickly from you, and indeed I wrap it up with a question from Tina from New Zealand. You've got your own people watching, which is good. But what's your big hope for 2022? And indeed maybe look at it, what do we need to be doing now to make sure we're moving rapidly in the year ahead?
We need to have ambition and we need to have commitment. And we need to make sure that as we recover from a global pandemic that's wreaked economic havoc, that we're putting decarbonisation in our energy systems at the centre of it.
Thank you so much. And Angela, I'm leaving you the closing word here. We're looking ahead to COP26. You're looking ahead to a very busy few days here. Your hopes and dreams for the near time and the long term.
I think I'll just build on what Megan said. We all need ambition, but we also need trust. And that means that the next big thing in global energy transition is thousands of smaller steps that involve more people and communities in facing real choices and ensuring that they follow their pathways to clean, affordable, reliable and equitable energy futures.
Thank you so much. And indeed, throughout the next few days, we're going to hear a lot more about that. Indeed, well done to all at the World Energy Council, really putting this World Energy Week together. It's very, very important. I want to thank Angela, Megan, thank you so much, Ahlem and Kim, a great panel there, really looking at what we need to do and also what is being done. So I think that's something we take to heart as well. Two big corporations, two big players in the world and actually moving to make sure we're heading in this direction. And great to get everybody's opinion and indeed everybody's insight. So I have to leave it here and I believe I'm going to hand it back to Arthur.
Eithne, thank you very much indeed, and also thank you to all of the panelists for a fantastic opening session. I couldn't think of anything better than the title is Certainty of Uncertainty, and also for the panelists to unpack some of the issues associated with that. From my perspective, I took away a number of key headlines that I think explain some of the debate that was going on, but also some of the challenges that we are likely to face. And it's those challenges that I think will be very much part of the dialogue and the chat potentially over the course of the next 3 days. I mean, I think, you know, my first point on this was, it was said by TotalEnergies, is that it set out the challenge and also the opportunity, as Megan talked about from New Zealand. The challenge in reality is that the world will need more energy source over the course of the next 10, 20 years. But at the same time, as a result of Paris in the last COP meeting, we recognize the need to reduce emissions. So how do we manage the dichotomy of greater energy need that is potentially going to come from hydrocarbons and other sources, and the need to take out emissions? And that really, I think, leads to this notion of, you know, basically our certainty of uncertainty, because the answer to that is not clear. I think the other aspect that came through is that, as Angela mentioned, you know, we need to be thinking about transition, but also transformation. And as we heard from the minister in New Zealand, actually a post-pandemic world and the economic investment that governments will need to take allows us to think about transformation now, not in the future, not in 10, 20 years' time, but right now, to invest in a new energy system. And as Angela said, as we think about society going forward over the course of the next number of years, energy is going to be as important as climate change. And therefore, that investment is something that governments can take a lead on. So uncertainty, yes, as to how do we deal with the dichotomy, but certainty, yes, on the context of this is an opportunity for governments to invest in a new economic future. I think the other, sorry, no, yeah.
You know, I mean, again, I think it was so important listening to everybody in that. And I was very, very encouraged also to hear, you know, Megan talk about how the conversation is beginning to shift. And I think we are seeing this whereby that us and them and the sort of, you know, two different tiers in terms of energy production is shifting. It's, you know, I think people are beginning to realize we have to keep the lights on today, and we have to actually fuel that transition to make sure that we're moving. So it's again about vested interest in terms of keeping people moving forward and helping economies as well. All that has to be done. And, you know, so I was encouraged by that conversation. An area we didn't get much time to talk about, of course, was energy poverty. I know it'll be something that you'll be looking at over the next few days. And again, what type of energy will suit different countries, different communities, and different economies.
Yes, I think, and I suppose to a degree, Eithne, that links into, I think, one of the big themes from, I think, the previous session. And I'll take Angela's words for this, but it is when we think about energy systems in the future and the agents of change to create those energy systems, we need to be thinking about public, we need to be thinking about private, and we need to be thinking about policy at the same time. In other words, there's a new democratization and a decentralization of energy systems. And it's no longer just government policymakers talking to business. For us to be dealing with things like energy poverty, for us to be dealing with things like skill shortages or upskilling in the context of moving to a new energy system, then we actually have to be thinking about a completely different dialogue that is taking place in the energy system. I think you and I have been at many energy events where candidly the industry just talks to itself, and it talks to itself about new technologies, new opportunities, new markets. But I think that needs to change. And I think, you know, our theme of energy for better lives links into this need for us to change the energy debate and involve the public communities, because they need to be involved as much as the organizations like TotalEnergies and others as we go forward. And I think for me, that is one of the key components, and I think it sets us up awfully well for the next 3 days. But I don't know, Eithne, from your point of view, whether that was one of the key takeaways you had as well.
I think without a doubt it was. And again, as you said, when we look back on the energy conferences we have done over the years, and the shift in narrative that we're seeing now, without a doubt, I do think, we've got a very, very different and a very targeted, clear new narrative. And I think it's very, very encouraging. And I know it must be particularly encouraging, for the World Energy Council, because again, their sort of, mode of operation when Angela took over was to very people-centric. And it is now, it's probably top of agenda when we look at it in possibly every big oil and gas conference that's out there. So I think it's very heartening to people around the world to look at how the big energy producers are shifting not just their narrative, but their action. I think the work that they're already putting in terms of cleaner fuel, in terms of their research, in terms of their own carbon footprint, all of that I think is very, very hopeful and very encouraging for the future. But as we heard there, everybody has to be involved in this conversation. And again, that appeal, and I suppose as Angela said, it has to happen. It's not just on a regional level. We really need to see global harmony in terms of where we're going, with the climate talk, with the energy discussion. All of that has to be on a higher level, and it has to be for the benefit of everybody in society.
No, I agree. And I think that one of the challenges to that debate is maybe what I would call different timelines for the discussion on energy transition and transformation. And what I mean by that is that I think we're all aligned on the longer term timeline. In other words, by 2030, 40, 50, we have commitments to reduce carbon emissions. We heard that from TotalEnergies in terms of what they're doing on their level 1 and level 2 emissions. And we hear this from all existing energy companies about the future. We heard hydrogen mentioned by each one of the panelists over the course of the last hour as a long-term solution for where we need to go. We also heard something about the middle ground, which is, the importance of battery storage in some form to deal with the fact that renewables are intermittent and our energy systems aren't capable of dealing with that in the medium term. But I do think, what we've seen over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks globally is that there are challenges to the way in which we think about energy transition in the short term. Those challenges of supply and demand not matching, and the market at the moment not enabling that match to happen, not without obviously high prices for gas. And we saw yesterday crude oil go above $80. So there are challenges in the short term in the context of our transition and transformation to both the medium and the long term. But one of the issues I think the short term has highlighted, and it was mentioned by yourself and other of the panelists, is the need for cooperation, as you mentioned. Global cooperation to deal with supply and demand short-term issues will be critical if we are to manage a difficult winter in the short term, and literally over the next 3 to 4 months. If we get severe winters in North America and in Europe, we have a very different debate and discussion happening. And I think it highlights that need for cooperation, which is fundamental, I believe, to energy for better lives. Unless we cooperate in the way that we talked about with communities, unless we cooperate across regions, and unless we cooperate across governments, then indeed there will be more certainty of uncertainty that will pepper our debate over the course of the next year.
Indeed it will. And again, I think what we heard from Megan there from a government point of view, as she said, the conversation has widened and it needed to widen, and it's encouraging that it has widened. Different voices are coming to the table. Different people have different interests, different needs. But ultimately, I think it is the one big picture in terms of the energy transition. The journey towards decarbonisation has well and truly began. And I mean, now I think it needs to speed up. I think that was the other thing we heard. And I'm sure throughout the conversation, in the next few days, it's probably one of the messages that we're going to hear, the need for speed, the need for urgency, and actually more action. I think that's what people are looking for.
Yeah, and I think, that action is obviously linked to one of the themes that you were, asking the panelists about, which was investment. Because action needs to happen in the context of infrastructure, of energy choices, of involving the public, of reskilling to incorporate new energy systems within your economies. And investment obviously will be critical to that. And I think as we lead up to Glasgow, this topic of investment, I think, will be very much top of mind. Not investment in the context of where we'll be in 10 to 15 years, but investment that is needed in energy systems in the near term. And I think think we can see some of that near-term investment, as Angela mentioned. Let's not just think about investment as in what technology do we invest in or what infrastructure do we try to change, but let's think about investment in the context of communities and individuals as well. The reskilling that Megan talked about that they need to take place in New Zealand. The investment in building a narrative and a communication with local communities. So I think sometimes we think of investment as in the bankers that we see where I'm standing here in London, you know, all the buildings around us. But I think investment needs a broader interpretation as investment in time to have dialogues with different communities to ensure they understand and we understand this whole issue of energy literacy and what that means for us as we go forward. There is a cost associated with transition. There is change needed with transition. If people bury themselves, their heads in the sand, then unfortunately that transition will be harder, and we will be back to our title of the certainty of uncertainty. We need a break from that, and I think investment, both dollars and in time and in dialogue, will be absolutely critical to the way in which we think about transition over the course of the next number of years.
Indeed, and I know you're going to explore it in depth in the next few days. I'll join you tomorrow, and there's so many great topics out there, but I think, you know, the conversation has to continue. The conversation, I think, where it has shifted from 5 years ago is so very different. It's very, very encouraging. And again, I think it is focused in the right area. We have to do so much, and I think people are doing a lot. And I think, you know, the general public, you talked about, you know, energy sort of literacy, so to speak. It's just people understanding, and Angela expressed that concern too in Norway, too, worried about, are people ready for this transition? Yes, there'll be a cost, and we all have to play our part. And even energy efficiency at the moment, people can instantly get involved in this. So I think sometimes people look at, well, what can we do as individuals? But I think if nothing else, we can show them that collectively, 1 million individuals can do an awful lot. So there's a role for everybody to play. There's a place for everybody in this transition. But again, it's bringing it all together, understanding where it is now, where we're going, and what we all want to do. So I look forward to tomorrow to briefly seeing you, and indeed you'll be back in action for the next few days.
Thank you, Eithne, and again, you know, thank you to the panelists for setting us off. I think, you know, for you and I, again, we've done many of these. It's quite extraordinary that we've started a World Energy Week Live with a conversation about what needs to change, not necessarily in the context of the molecules, but in the context of civil society, the dialogue, and the way in which we need to frame the discussion and the debate with society as we go forward. A radical change from where we were 5 years ago. I think the fact that we are talking about hydrogen as a long-term solution. Hydrogen, even 3 to 4 years ago, would have been a sidebar conversation at energy events that perhaps, you know, a few individuals, scientists might have attended. Now it's very much at the center. We hear politicians talk about it. We hear TotalEnergies talk about it. We hear all of the stakeholders that are involved in energy view this as one of the solutions as we go forward. But finally, I would say that one of the key things that, you know, creates the certainty of uncertainty is what I call the and issue. When we think about transitions and transformations in the energy system in the past, it's been a transition, let's say, from coal to oil or oil to gas. And now our transition is an and transition. It's an and in the context of different energy sources. It's an and in the context of the different stakeholders involving the public and communities, as we've talked about now. And it's an and in the context of options and basically that we can invest in terms of those local skills. So a very different and a complex system that we're transitioning to. But it's fantastic, I believe, that we've started our 3 days of discussion around energy for better lives with this much broader and very different conversation. So thank you both to yourself, Eithne, and obviously for facilitating, and also to our panelists for that wonderful discussion.